Republicans just quietly opened a door that Democrats thought was welded shut, a path that can move President Trump's election bill through the Senate with 50 votes instead of 60. It happened on July 16, 2026, inside the House Budget Committee, and almost nobody covered it. They haven't passed it, they haven't defeated the filibuster, but they approved a strategy that could allow key parts of the Save America Act to move through the Senate with a simple majority. And the way they're attempting it is the real story. Republicans took a voter verification proposal, connected it to $10 billion in federal grants, and placed it inside a larger package containing defense, intelligence, and agricultural funding. If the plan works, Democrats lose the filibuster as their primary defense. There are three major obstacles that could destroy the entire strategy, and one of them isn't controlled by either political party. Keep a spot for that one because it may decide everything. By the end, you'll understand why Senator Lisa Murkowski repeatedly opposed the bill, why Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna helped freeze the House, and how Speaker Mike Johnson is attempting to turn an election bill into a budget bill. If you want reporting that follows what Congress actually did instead of declaring victory before the vote happens, subscribe below to Both Sides Politics. If they said it, show it. If they voted, pull the record. Let's begin with the Save America Act. What it would do. The proposal would require documentary proof of United States citizenship when registering for federal elections and photo identification when voting. Federal law has prohibited non-citizens from voting in federal elections since 1996. The new proposal would add documentation requirements intended to verify compliance with that existing prohibition. Supporters ask a straightforward question. If citizenship is already required, why shouldn't registration officials verify it? Opponents answer with a different question. How many eligible American citizens could be blocked because they don't possess an accepted document, or because the documents don't match their current legal name? That is the real policy dispute. It isn't over whether non-citizens should vote in federal elections. They legally cannot. It is over how citizenship should be verified and what happens when an eligible voter has difficulty satisfying the new documentation requirements. Supporters cite polling showing broad public support for proof of citizenship and voter identification. One survey highlighted CNN data analyst Harry Enton reportedly found support from 95% of Republicans and 71% of Democrats. But polling on a broad idea isn't always identical to support for every position inside a specific bill. Voters can support citizenship verification while disagreeing over which documents should count, how exceptions should work, and what assistance should be available to eligible voters. Those implementation questions will matter if this legislation advances. On February 11th, 2026, the House passed the SAVE Act, 218 to 213. The vote fell almost entirely along partisan lines. Texas Representative Henry Culler was the only Democrat to join Republicans. President Trump made the proposal a centerpiece of his legislation during urging Congress to stop non-citizens and other ineligible people from participating in federal elections. The House delivered the votes, the bill reached the Senate, and ran into the same barrier that has killed priorities from both parties, the legislative filibuster. Republicans control the Senate, but they don't control 60 seats. Most legislation can pass with a simple majority after debate has ended. But ending that debate generally requires 60 votes. When senators are conducting a filibuster, that distinction matters. The Constitution doesn't require 60 votes for this legislation. The Senate's procedural rules created that threshold. On March 17, 2026, the Senate voted 51 to 48 to begin moving the legislation forward. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska was the only Republican who opposed the proceeding. The vote demonstrated majority support for debating the bill. It did not provide 60 votes eventually needed to overcome sustained opposition. A later cloture effort involving a photo identification amendment received 53 Republican votes and still failed to clear the 60-vote threshold. That's the frustration driving this fight. Republicans can produce 51 votes. They can produce 53 votes. But unless Democrats provide additional support, Republicans change the process. Those majorities cannot end the filibuster. It requires the art of compromise. Senator Mike Lee has argued that Republican leadership should place legislation on the floor and keep the debate going until the Senate reaches a conclusion. Lee also rejects Democratic claims that the bill would authorize the government to indiscriminately purge eligible voters. He called that interpretation fear-mongering and argued that the legislature's text neither requires nor authorizes such a result. But Democrats and voting rights organizations maintain that documentation errors and inaccessible records could still remove or prevent eligible citizens from registering. Those arguments need to be judged against the actual language, accepted document lists, and procedural procedures available for voters whose records don't match. The strongest defense of the bill is that citizenship requirements should be verifiable. The strongest criticism is that the verification can become disenfranchisement if eligible citizens lack a realistic way to satisfy the process. Both questions deserve answers. Republicans then faced an institutional choice when they approach this: keep the filibuster and accept that legislation may be blocked, or eliminate the filibuster and pass it through a simple majority. President Trump has pushed for Republicans to do this repeatedly, but Senate Majority Leader John Thune said the votes to eliminate the legislative filibuster weren't even close to existing. The person preventing Trump from changing the rule wasn't Chuck Schumer, it was the Republican conference itself. Senator Ron Johnson summarized the disagreement clearly. He said Republicans want to preserve the filibuster, but some believe Democrats will eliminate the next time doing so. It benefits their agenda. That is the entire internal Republican argument. One group believes preserving the rule protects the Senate from extreme swings in policy. The other believes Republicans are protecting a restraint that Democrats will eventually abandon anyways. Both sides understand the risk. If Republicans eliminate the legislature filibuster, a future Democratic majority could use the same precedent to pass abortion protections, gun control legislation, national election laws, or other policies Republicans strongly oppose. A procedural weapon doesn't remain loyal to the party that created it. Susan Collins of Maine added another complication. Collins supports the clean version of the Save America Act, but she opposes eliminating the filibuster to pass it. That means Republicans can count on her as a supporter of the policy without counting her as a supporter of the procedure required to enact it. Then there is Mitch McConnell. The former Republican leader repeatedly opposed different attempts to advance the legislation. McConnell has historically defended the filibuster and warned Republicans against creating powers that a future Democratic majority could inherit. His absence from the Senate during June and July of this year removed a likely Republican opponent from the building. But an absent senator doesn't automatically become a yes or no or yes vote. Republicans still need an actual majority present in voting for whatever the final package reaches the Senate. By June 2026, Republican leaders appeared ready to move on. The Save related amendment failed during a marathon Senate session. Bernie Monero acknowledged that the test vote had failed and said Republicans would need to reconsider their strategy. Additional votes appeared unlikely. The bill looked finished. And this is where the story turns. Tune in, because this is where it's going to get really good. Because the next move didn't come from the Senate. It came from a rebellion inside the House. In late June 2026, a group led by Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna helped block a procedural rules used to advance unrelated House legislation. They weren't merely criticizing Democrats or the Senate. They were preventing their own party from conducting normal House business until Speaker Mike Johnson developed a stronger plan for the Save America Act. The rebellion came from within the party, and it was severe enough that Johnson ended the House voting schedule early before July 4th recess and sent members back to their districts. That's how important this issue had become for a Republican base. A small group willing to freeze the House and delay its own party's agenda to force another attempt. President Trump's continued pushing the legislation during his July 4th independence remarks. Then on July 5th, Johnson revealed the new strategy. Instead of attempting to pass the original legislation through the Senate process, House Republicans would try to connect election requirements to federal spending and move them through the budget reconciliation. Reconciliation is a special process for legislation affecting federal spending, revenue, or debt. The critical advantage is that qualifying reconciliation legislation can pass the Senate with a simple majority. It cannot be blocked by normal 60-vote legislative filibuster. But there's a catch, and it may determine the entire bill's outcome. Reconciliation cannot be used as a magic label placed on any policy Republicans want to pass. The provisions must have a genuine budgetary effect. Items whose impact merely incidental to their broader policy purpose can be removed under the Byrd Rule. That is why previous attempts to place election requirements inside reconciliation have encountered resistance. So Johnson's new strategy changes the structure. Instead of directly ordering every state to adopt the same election system, The House plan would offer federal funding to states that implement qualifying proof of citizenship and voter identification. States wouldn't necessarily be forced to participate. The proposal provides approximately $10 billion for election-related grants. To put that figure in context, it approaches twice what Congress has reportedly approved for election administration since 2002. That money is the budgetary connection Republicans hope will allow the election provisions to survive the reconciliation review. They simply didn't attach a voter identification mandate to a spending bill and hope nobody noticed. They created a federal grant program and connected eligibility for that money to the state election policies. Whether you support it, whether you oppose it, that is a significant change in legislative strategy. But the package goes beyond elections. The broader plan, $13 billion for intelligence, $12 billion for agriculture, $10 billion for election-related grants. Republican leaders have called it the Save and Protect America Act. The political strategy is clear here. Combine election security with military funding, intelligence resources, and agricultural assistance, priorities that different Republican factions will find difficult to oppose simultaneously. That doesn't make the package literally irresistible. Some fiscal conservatives object to the spending. Some moderates prefer bipartisan negotiations, which they should. Some support of the original SAVE Act believe this incentive-based version is too weak, and some Republicans doubt that the election provisions will survive the Byrd Rule, but Johnson has made voting against that package politically more complicated than voting against the standalone bill. On July 16th, the House Budget Committee advanced the resolution in a 20-14 vote. We already know how it went. The vote began the reconciliation process. It did not enact the grants. It did not pass the full House. It did not guarantee that the election provisions will survive the Senate. This is where reporting needs discipline. Republicans have discovered a possible route around the filibuster. They have not successfully traveled it yet. The obstacles remain. The first is the House. Johnson operates with one of the smallest governing margins in congressional history. He can afford almost no Republican defections. Fiscal conservatives could reject new spending. Hardliners could decide the election language doesn't go far enough. Moderates could object to combining on election night a fight with military and agricultural funding. A handful of members can kill the package before it reaches the Senate. The House is expected to consider this resolution during the week beginning July 20th. That's this week. The floor vote will be the first major test of whether Johnson can keep the Republican conference together. The second obstacle is the one I told you to keep a spot for, the one that neither party controls, the Senate parliamentarian. The parliamentarian advises whether provisions satisfy reconciliation requirements and the Byrd Rule. That $10 billion grant program gives Republicans a strong budgetary argument than a direct national election mandate, but creating a federal spending that doesn't automatically protect every policy condition attached to that spending. The parliamentarian could allow the grants, remove some of the requirements, or decide that the election policy effect overwhelms the budgetary purpose. If the key provisions are removed, Republicans return to the same 60-vote barrier they've faced since February, and it's dead in the water. The third obstacle is implementation time. Even if Congress passes the proposal and President Trump signs it this year, implementation before November 3rd midterm elections is extremely unlikely. The proposed funding would operate through fiscal year 2027, which begins in October. Federal agencies would need to establish the grant program, states would need to adapt qualifying requirements, update their election systems, train workers, and notify voters. Legal challenges would almost certainly follow easily. This fight is therefore less about changing the November 3rd midterms and more about determining the rules for elections after 2026. That's key here. That limitation matters. Politicians repeatedly sell legislation as though signing a bill causes an instant nationwide implementation. It doesn't. They're fooling you. But the reconciliation strategy still changes the political math. Susan Collins can support the package without voting to eliminate the filibuster. The proposal needs only a simple Senate majority if its provisions survive reconciliation. Vice President J.D. Vance could break a 50-50 tie. Republican senators who previously blamed the 60-vote requirement could face a vote where that explanation no longer applies. But even then, the passage isn't guaranteed. Republican senators may object to the cost. That is why this is a real breakthrough without being a completed victory. From February through June, supporters watched the proposal receive a majority-level support without reaching the Senate 60 threshold. Beginning July 16th, Republicans started attempting to create a version that qualifies for the 50-vote process. The question is whether the substance survives the procedure. Democrats call the proposal voter suppression and warned that eligible citizens could lose access because of documentation barriers. Republicans call the citizenship verification a basic safeguard and argue that legal requirements mean little without a method of enforcement. They're not wrong. The public deserves more than slogans from either side. Republicans need to explain which documents will be accepted, how the name changes will be handled, and what happens when an eligible voter cannot easily access a birth certificate or passport. Democrats need to explain what verification system they would accept. This is called compromise. Election security cannot become an excuse to burden eligible voters unnecessarily. Voting rights can be accommodated. They cannot become an excuse to reject every attempt at verifying eligibility. The details determine whether this is a workable safeguard or bureaucratic barrier. But here's what's going to happen next. The first major event is expected: House debate during the week of July 20th, where Johnson's narrow majority will face its test. If the House advances the plan, who knows where it'll go? Until then, nobody should call this done. Republicans haven't defeated the filibuster, and whether Republicans can keep their coalition together long enough to use it. This is the real story, not a secret victory, not a dead bill, a high-stakes procedural gamble that could reshape a federal House vote. The parliamentarians ruling on every senator's issue, who changes position once the filibuster is removed from the equation. Subscribe to Both Sides Politics if you want the votes, the documents, and the full argument without either party's spin replacing the evidence. Then tell me down here in the comments, should states receive federal funding for requiring proof of citizenship and voter identification? I think so, but you tell me yes or no. And what protections should exist for eligible citizens who don't have immediate access to those required documents? Subscribe and make sure you turn on those notifications so you don't miss a single development. And if you want to help keep us independent, then there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description, and every dollar goes straight back into us. buymeacoffee.com/bothsidepolitics. If they said it, we're going to show it. If they voted, we'll try to pull the record. And if you want to see the next video, click down below.